Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome to today's Progress Semaphore webinar, Maximizing the Value of Your Semaphore Investment and Beyond. We're excited to have Jim Morris and Biju George with us today, both solution engineers here at Progress, who will be leading today's discussion. With that, I'll hand it over to Jim and Biju to get us started.
Thank you, Hanal. I thought we'd start with just talking about what we call the Semaphore promise. So it gives you a sense of what Semaphore is for. Why does Semaphore be brought into an organization, and what types of problems does it solve, and processes does it enable, etc. So really, when we talk about Semaphore, we do call it a semantic AI platform because it uses a lot of different methods, including things like NLP and ontologies and stuff that fits into the overall AI domain to deliver very specific value. And we also integrate very well with AI solutions, newer AI solutions like Gen AI and RAG solutions that people are employing. Semaphore has proved to be very successful in that space, as well as the entire data platform of Progress. So it really gets down to you've got data that is inconsistent or is not in a form that is easy enough to integrate with other data because it's inconsistent. It's semantically nebulous. You don't know exactly what this information means, whether that's a document, a sentence, a paragraph, a single field value in a database. All these can have semantic inconsistencies. And what Semaphore is about is managing and creating the metadata that reflects your organization accurately and consistently. So you can have the best data integration intentions in the world, but if your data is inconsistent, how will it connect to other data? That can get very complicated and managed at a very low level in the system. The point of Semaphore is that you're managing this at the subject matter expert level. So it's a business managed platform, but it's used to do some very sophisticated capabilities in creating metadata and enriching your information assets with consistency. The benefits of Semaphore include this very rich user-oriented platform for managing models, managing knowledge models specifically. It's really about capturing the knowledge of your organization in a format that can be easily leveraged and consumed. We were standards-based, so we use the RDF platform, the graph platform to do this. So we're very easily connected to other enterprise information. And we've got all the capabilities for you to you could be managing Semaphore data, a knowledge model, taxonomy, et cetera, ontology. You could be managing it with a very small team or just yourself, or you could be managing it with a wide, a spread of like federated governance model. We have different parts of the business managing their part of the vocabularies, whether it's for a specific use case to solve in a particular area of the business, or is really as an enterprise scale solution that you're delivering. We fit in all of those domains as our use cases that we'll highlight, emphasize. And among the use cases, we're going to focus on a few, but these are from some very common areas, from enterprise search and content management. You're talking SharePoint, AEM, Oracle Content System Management, any system that really depends on metadata for content to be managed. We're very successful in that space, as well as in facilitating search interfaces, whether that's improving the indexing or improving the user experience of using that search system. And that extends to really all of these other solutions. We mentioned AI before. Machine learning and AI solutions are often unpredictable because they're more probabilistic based. Well, Semaphore is very deterministic. What is the information about your business that you need to model, and how can that be applied to your content? So it's really complementary to AI and machine learning solutions. And I think the other use cases will bring out some of these other things about information security and data protection pretty well. So we'll save that for that. So the first use case I want to mention is a client, Boeing. Boeing's been a client of Progress for a long time. And I chose this really because it does emphasize the long-term value that Semaphore is bringing to the organization. There's a team that at Boeing that manages these terms and nomenclature that are used across businesses and applications. They've been doing this for probably over, over 10 years at least. And it's a small team. It's only a few people that manage this service using Semaphore to the entire Boeing corporation, which, as you can imagine, is a very large organization. But consistent vocabulary services, having even access to the right acronyms to use. Some projects start with something, that seems as simple as that. Well, it's not usually simple. It can be much more complicated than that. And then they really leverage the ease of use that Semaphore provides enables them to leverage other resources in the organization to help manage this information. So some of the information vocabularies that this team manages are enterprise scale. They deal with any a part of the organization, but they also have some specific use cases where people need to manage their vocabularies and they need to have access to them in their own systems. And for that, they employ a federated governance model, which Semaphore easily supports, where they might have different business users managing their vocabularies or taxonomies that are specific to their operations. And when it makes sense, they can reuse information from the enterprise vocabularies. And again, that's a key value of the Semaphore platform to be able to support that type of collaboration and workflow. As I mentioned, this team is only three or so people, and they deliver this service to all of Boeing. And Boeing is also a Progress Data Platform client. They use MarkLogic. And I was wondering if Biju, you could just mention briefly how they're leveraging MarkLogic at Boeing.
Yeah, sure. So yes, Boeing uses MarkLogic or Progress Data Platform, other products also. So one of the impressive use cases is the when Boeing decided to use model-based systems engineering, abbreviated as MBSE, as a methodology. So with MBSE, what happens is engineering teams have a digital representation of everything that is involved, or we can call it digital twin creations actually. So everything that is involved in systems and parts that are used to create a product, including the documentation on the functional requirements, the design intention, the components, and how the parts together work for the device. They are all in one place in a digital format. Basically, it eliminates all the inefficiencies on the paper trail systems where knowledge is exchanged and stored using like disconnected emails or slides, PDF spreadsheets in that format, right? So, and additionally, this information has to be maintained in the highest levels of security with limited access to sensitive data within the organization on a need to know basis, basically, right? So the MBSC project uses Boeing's unified information management platform, where MarkLogic is serving as the metadata repository, where the data is ingested from different sources and its digital representation of. So basically, the formats are very different, right? There will be pictures, there will be XML files, there will be Word documents. Everything gets stored in MarkLogic using the underlying multimodal database store, and then applying security principles on top of it. So Boeing is essentially using the role-based security and the attribute-based security, and and they have an enterprise class ready system that was built in pretty fast as well. So what are the benefits uh, of this UAM platform or MBSC? Is building an aircraft or a plane that involves over like 6 million parts actually. So what the engineering team gets efficiency is they can quickly understand how a tiny change in a requirement impacts the delivery of the whole product, which parts are affected, which systems are affected because of that actually. So that is incredibly valuable in terms of money, time, and safety. Okay, so that's the Boeing's other use of MarkLogic.
Great. Thanks, Biju. Yeah, and the model-based systems engineering and other initiatives like that also depend on consistent metadata. So I know that manages the vocabulary services through using Semaphore are tied into so many enterprise initiatives because it really is kind of the hub for this type of activity. So if it's systems engineering or compliance or capability management, all aspects of the Boeing business and have these types of services as kind of their hub. It's pretty neat to watch how effective they are. The other use case I thought we would bring up is this analytics system. So it's safety analytics. So it's about a manufacturer and they're dealing with the safety of their information. So they're collecting information from across their entire enterprise all over the world with safety records that are generated by mechanics and shops and other locations in different countries. And they collect all that information together to make sure that they're not going to miss anything that's being seen out in the real world. And all that information comes into a platform and it's tagged with semaphore concepts. And these semaphore concepts are managed, these models are managed by, again, a fairly small team. For such a large operation, it's a very small team that looks at these vocabularies, works with subject matter experts in the business to deliver a very sophisticated set of knowledge models that deal with every single aspect of these things that they're manufacturing. And that, again, drives making sure that these records are consistently tagged and can be aggregated together when they need to, and so that people can do that type of analysis in a system that they developed that also uses that integration component. So I mentioned that earlier, that we're not just tagging the content and enriching the content with metadata, we're also facilitating the use of the content, because these vocabularies tie all this information together. So you can, say, well, I'm not just looking at this part, I'm looking at anything, any part of this type, for example, and what other parts has that impacted of this type. Those types of analytics questions that wouldn't be possible any other way. So again, a user of Semaphore for a very long time, they continue to drive value because they're tied directly to a critical function of the business. And they add, it's not about the vocabularies being valuable or adding value. It's about the program that they're supporting adding value. And the way they've managed to tie their operations so specifically to a particular business outcome is essential to the value that they deliver and the success that the team is seen to have in the organization. The other use case I thought I would mention, we don't have a slide for it, but I thought since Biju and I are both here, there's a great use case that we're doing at a food products company, a very large company, and it has to do with the effective use of research data. And this is, these by data, we mean data, but we also, tabular data, but it's also a lot of document data. So this is a company that has, engineers that go back decades. They may be retiring, all kinds of places generating research information. They're bringing all that information into a MarkLogic database where it can be aggregated and delivered effectively. But since they're kind of bringing data from everywhere, like somebody retires, so they get all the data from that particular science or department, and they have to make sure they're not bringing in data that needs to be secured. So initially, they were bringing in a lot of information that they had filters. They were trying to identify, PII and other types of sensitive data, proprietary data, that maybe shouldn't be in a general purpose data lake. But the filters were so general, as most filters like this are, a PII filter or something is going to look for standard patterns and things like that. And even employing things like AI are not going to be all that efficient. They're going to catch too much information. And there's just so much information that had to be manually looked at. It was not being successful. So when Semaphore came in, we can be much more tailored and specific to this particular company's requirements. So it's not just about finding a pattern, it's about finding a pattern near some other context that would indicate whether, okay, if this looks like it's a secure information like a social security number, but it's actually in the context of something that indicates it's not a social security number. And that's very specific to this organization. It's a key message about where Semaphore really adds value, is where there's that little missing piece that's specific to an organization's knowledge that needs to be considered when you're analyzing content like this. So once Semaphore was brought in to handle this, they were able to, that amount of information that needed to be manually looked at became much smaller and manageable, and they could actually bring data safely into this data lake for consumption. So right there, if you know that this is a MarkLogic implementation, MarkLogic is very big into security. So Semaphore can help identify the data, but we don't manage any data, right? So we're just delivering the metadata that helps other systems make use of it. And it's such a perfect marriage with the MarkLogic platform that is so focused on security. I wonder if Biju, you could just speak briefly about how Semaphore would use metadata like that to make sure that it's only visible to people that should see it.
Right. So what happens is Semaphore identifies the metadata and it says that actually, okay, this document has needs to be come up with a like a virtual rule saying that okay, this needs to be protected in this particular format, right? So, but as Jim was mentioning, Semaphore is not in the business of actual data management or protecting the data. So that is handed over to the backend database, which is the MarkLogic multimodal database. And at the heart, actually, MarkLogic security is role-based access control or RBAC. So in role-based security access control mechanism, the users do not get permissions directly, but instead they are assigned roles, and the roles define what actions that they can perform. Right, that actions are like whether they can read only or they can insert or update or change the document. And roles also control the privileges on the system level actions like running a code, managing databases, accessing modules. But that is not part of data management. So let's go with the permissions for the site time being. And one more powerful thing is roles can be reused and they can be combined. So the single user can actually inherit accesses from multiple roles. So this provides a lot of flexibility and scalability across different teams and applications, and combining and making like bigger roles for higher role people higher ups in the organization, and lower roles for people who are out of the country or things like that. Right? While role-based access control is the fundamental principle of MarkLogic security, MarkLogic goes well beyond simple role-based access, right? And that is what this company is essentially using, because there are fields which are identified like SSN or phone numbers, which have different classification levels, right? So MarkLogic offers fine-grained controls to secure data at the various levels. And one of that is called protected paths or element level security, which essentially means that you can restrict access to individual fields or elements within a JSON or an XML document. So the sensitive information is hidden even if the user can read the document, right? So if the document has an SSN field and the user do not have the permission to read SSN, but he can read the document in full, actually, he can still read the document, but the document when delivered to the customer will not have that SSN field included in it. Another feature is the redaction, which masks or remove the sensitive data, which is very important in the compliance with regulations like GDPR or HIPAA. Compartment security is another one, which is we can it's analogous to something known as a double lock. So a document will require multiple roles together, not just one to get an access. So it's useful in handling situations like users in multiple geolocations, but they cannot see each other, but some roles can see the worldwide data, that kind of situations. And there are many other things like query-based access control, where query results are filtered based on the user's identity. And of course, MarkLogic supports authentication through LDAP, SAML, single authentication mechanisms, and encryption both at the transit and rest, right? So all these things together, this company is using to ensure that actually they get the users get to see the data only that they should be seen, right? So, and it is the important thing to note is it is all handled within the database premises, actually. So the users who are building or the developers who are building the applications, they are not worried about whether an invalid data is coming out and getting displayed to the user. The UI developers or the middle tier or the application developers need not worry about that, because the security is applied at the database premises itself. Yeah, Jim.
Yeah, perfect. I'm more of a taxonomist and librarian than a database engineer, and sometimes it feels overwhelming that the sophistication of the solutions that MarkLogic fits into, because it can handle things at such many levels and different types of data with so normally as a core part of the platform. But you think about it like, well, it's still the data still needs to be in a format that these algorithms and rules can be applied to. So that's what Semaphore is all about. It's just making the information data more usable, more able to be integrated, more able to be used for things like security and compliance and connect to other data in the enterprise. And thus the information is consistently augmented with consistent metadata that often becomes a challenge to these types of solutions. And that's where Semaphore can very efficiently add value to these very complex solutions. So we can get into more use cases when we get to the Q&A. Those are just a few of our favorites that we thought really spoke to the long-term value that our platform is delivering to these organizations. What we thought we'd take a step back now and we've been talking about the Progress Data Platform. Now, both Semaphore and MarkLogic are part of that data platform, but there's other tools that have been part of the Progress family that are part of that platform as well. And I thought if Biju could go through some of the details of the Progress Data Platform before we get into Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. Okay, so yeah, it's the right time to discuss a little about Progress Data Platform in general and its role in advancing data agility throughout your organization. So what is the main problem that most enterprises face today? Most enterprises manage data from wide range of sources, enterprise applications, ERP systems, mainframes, or real-time data streams. The ongoing challenge is always how to bring all this information together in a practical and scalable manner and give to the business a unified view of your customer information or policy or whatever it is, right? So the data platform provides a structured approach for accomplishing it, moving from connection to creation and finally to consumption. Initially, in the connection part, it facilitates connectivity across a large set of data sources, regardless where the data resides or in which format it takes. In the creation phase, organizations can apply data governance, a governed data model, apply reference data, semantic analysis to the information, which exactly what Jim talked about, actually contextual analysis of the information, and then add structure, security, and clarity and meaning to the data. And this foundation makes it possible to confidently use the data across the business, supporting a wide variety of outcomes, such as transactional applications or analytics, visualization, or different API systems. And even recently, we see a lot of development towards MarkLogic preparing data or the Progress Data Platform preparing the data for the AI systems. So by adopting the methodology, the organizations are able to go beyond simple data aggregation to more meaningful and business-driven data utility, and also reusing the consumable model, right? So after connect, create, and consume, that same consumption model can be used for different types of applications, including AI applications. Technology component-wise, Progress Data Platform encompasses multiple enterprise-ready Progress products. So a multimodal database is a core of it actually, which includes for basically your tabular data or XML, text, JSON, binary, temporal, geospatial, graph. That I said a lot actually, but that's the reality. MarkLogic is a multimodal database that you can bring in your data in its original format. Some enterprise systems will have it in like text format, and then maybe many of them that come from outside the company organization will have it in XML format. Locally developed data will be in JSON format, and maybe something is being modeled as triples or RDF data. You might have geospatial data, you might have time-sensitive data like temporal data. They can all brought into MarkLogic in its original format itself, and it can be queried also going over multiple models together. And also, the data platform includes an embedded search engine, then a business rules engine called Corticon. There are connectors to different enterprise systems under the umbrella data direct connectors. And of course, Semaphore is there for vocabulary, taxonomy management, metadata management, and data governance. And it also includes user development kits, user interface development toolkits from the popular Kendo UI, and that is also available under the Progress Data Platform. consumers or customers use the platform for developing enterprise solutions. They employ different patterns like data mesh or data fabric, microservices, or the event-driven patterns. This data platform can fit into any of the enterprise patterns that you want to bring into, or advanced AI use cases like retrieval augmented generation, or even advanced agentic AI can be built using the platform components. Okay, so we were focusing on Semaphore in this session actually. So let us quickly put my view on how to when to use Semaphore, which is a component inside the Progress Data Platform. So many teams content with unstructured or inconsistently labeled data, and Jim had a lot of examples around that. Lack of enterprise cataloging or struggle with data silos or disparate repositories, each using different nomenclature. Even more important when it comes to companies which span across like Europe and US. The spellings might be different, but spelling that might be a smaller problem, but even the meanings might be different. So these issues can lead into silos and make it difficult to align knowledge, workflows, and business objectives across departments, across countries. Identifying and managing sensitive data becomes another piece of the puzzle, which becomes more complex in such fragmented environments. Semaphore is specifically designed to help organizations to navigate through these complications. One of the platform's core strength lies in the ability to integrate semantic insights directly into existing applications, giving context to the data so that the data can be interpreted correctly without ambiguity and not with much people dependency in place. Right? So integrating Semaphore with the Progress Data Platform allows these capabilities to scale across different data sets, providing robust context, structure, and governance to the everyday business operations. So what are the business benefits? So using Semaphore with the Progress Data Platform brings a lot of tangible benefits to the business. So they have listed actually, one is the combined solution cultivates an environment where innovation can really thrive. Teams are free to focus on new initiatives than becoming bogged down by inconsistencies and manual processes, right? So it in turn helps in cost savings, in improving the accuracy. Your data is more trustworthy than thinking that actually, okay, is it real data? Can I be blindly use it for my business processes? You can navigate away from that kind of thinking. And then intuitive prompt creation and response understanding. That is again related to specifically AI use cases, and add solid enterprise architecture instead of one AI initiative, right? So multiple AI initiatives on a single data platform is what we see. Maybe under the customers might call it agentic AI actually, but yes, the data is prepared and it's all available in the semantic platform. And then you build multiple AI systems on top of the same data set, the curated, correct contextual data set, right? So that increases the value of using data platform and Semaphore in specifically.
Yeah, one of the things we didn't talk too much about, but it's something that Biju and I both worked together on in several cases, are these Gen AI graph rag solutions that is supported by the Progress Data Platform, including MarkLogic and Semaphore. And it's this idea of trustworthiness and adding that component to your RAG solution, so you can incorporate AI into your business, into your processes, but making sure that you're doing it in a way that where the AI knows its boundaries, knows its guardrails, knows that this means this, and that's all part of the knowledge model, part of that solution that Semaphore delivers.
Yeah. Yeah, specifically in the RAG solution, that is a retrieval augmented generated solution. So we have customers who use that data, the cleaning part of it actually, the prompt part of it, that is to ensure that the user query and the system generated prompt, they are combined together, but then it makes it trip to Semaphore to ensure that actually the prompt does not have unnecessary or things which should not be asked actually, like asking a specific customer information, those kind of things, right? So cleansing is done on the prompt side, and then once the response is generated, before the response is directly presented to the user. Again, a sanitization exercise happens to ensure that it is not bringing in some sensitive data, and tone, the tone of the response matches the query, right? So the query was on a complaint mode. Actually, your answer should be in a resolution mode, right? If the answer is not in the resolution mode, it goes for a retry, right? So that kind of analysis is done on the responses as well. So implemented in chatbots and situations like that.
Yeah, those projects have been a lot of fun and very successful, and our clients are moving them into production as we speak. So we wanted to mention, we're talking about the Progress Data Platform, that it is coming up in September 14th to 16th. And we had this session last year. We had a similar conference, and it was kind of the first kind of joint MarkLogic and Semaphore and Progress oriented session last year. And I think we were all, I shouldn't say we were surprised. We were pleasantly surprised that it was so successful. So many people showed up wanting to learn more about the platform and just sharing what they're using the platform for, and challenges that that just related to their implementation project, even if it's not directly related to our technology. These are people coming together to share the challenges of building a data platform. And we'll be specifically focusing on how the Progress Data Platform, including Semaphore and MarkLogic, are able to add that value. Biju and I will both be there this year, and I'll be doing a session specifically on Semaphore recent enhancements that actually leverage the MarkLogic database. Very exciting time for Semaphore. So is there anything else we wanted to say about this?
No, you get to see a lot of customers who have developed things. There are many customers who are speaking in the summit this year. So it will be definitely an enriching session. We welcome everybody to register and come to the summit.
Yes, and it's at the Spy Museum. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah.
I'm
very much interested in, just excited to go there.
Exactly. Okay, we'll toss it back to Hinal to go to the next steps.
Thank you, Jim and Biju, for leading a thoughtful discussion and sharing your valuable insights. Before we jump into Q&A, I'd like to share a quick resource. On your screen, you'll see a QR code that links to the What's New page in Semaphore. This is where you can explore the latest product updates, features, and release notes. If you've been using Semaphore and have a few minutes, we'd love to hear your feedback. We're collecting reviews on a couple of platforms, and your experience and perspective would be incredibly valuable to us. Now let's move into the Q&A portion of today's session. Jim and Biju, if you could join us on camera, we'll begin with a few questions that have come in. Okay, before we get started, I'll pull up some of the questions that we have gotten from the audience. Biju, Semaphore sounds like a distributed database. How is it different from that with a front end similar to a messaging system?
Yeah, actually, that's a nice question. Semaphore does have a distributed architecture, but it is not a database in itself. So if you really look at it, actually, Semaphore is a application suite that goes in front of the business, but there is a database layer behind it, and that is the that is MarkLogic. Okay, MarkLogic is a distributed database as we speak, actually, but Semaphore as a system it follows a distributed architecture, but it is not a distributed database. So we have to distinguish between what Semaphore does from a it is I will not call it completely as an in-memory processing thing, actually, but still it's something like that, actually, where you get it from a SharePoint location or from a database. You process that classification, do or fact extraction, and it persists that back into a database layer. Okay, so that database is a Progress product again, which is following a distributed architecture. But Semaphore is not a database. It cannot be classified as a database.
We've been using Semaphore for taxonomy and metadata enrichment. How can we extend that investment to drive smart automation or AI initiatives across the enterprise?
Yeah, that's a great question, because as I mentioned earlier, Biju and I, in particular, are directly involved in a lot of AI initiatives at different clients using both Semaphore and MarkLogic. And I'd say, just being familiar with, general, people that use Semaphore, to be able to, you need to get on AI projects, be seen as a component of those solutions. So become conversant in agentic and RAG AI terminology and the latest research, be able to reference things, because things like graph RAG is a kind of a well-known and well-established value-adding approach to using AI. But point out that Semaphore is more than just a graph. It's these in a graph RAG solution. Often they're creating these very opaque or hard to understand graphs of data, which can be useful, but it's not something that could be understood by a subject matter expert. The idea behind Semaphore is you're managing a transparent, continually evolving, subject matter expert validated graph, and it's that known context that you're sending to the AI. You're telling it exactly what the organization knows. So and we have a whole process in place to continually develop that model, because that's the next question we'll get, right? Is, well, geez, okay, I've got these models. How do I continue to develop them? Whereas the graph RAG might have some kind of automated way to do that. There's two problems with that. One is you're only looking at the data. The graph is generated by the data when you're using graph RAG. We're talking about a subject matter expert validated graph that is, it's not a black box. It's directly reflecting the business, and it can contain facts that are only known to the knowledge model. They may not be present enough in your documents or on the internet to represent what's special about your business. So Semaphore has a really important role to play there. So yeah, we can talk more about that and get more materials and collaborate with you to help you make that case.
Thanks, Jim. Leading on to the second question here. If we've already built a strong knowledge model, what are the next steps to elevate its impact, whether for governance, analytics, or operational workflows?
Yeah, I can take that one as well. And this is great. Yeah, you've built a strong knowledge model. You've gotten that far, and I think in my opinion, just having worked in this space for a long time, is you got to make sure that knowledge model isn't behind some closed doors, or it's not. It doesn't require special access to understand. Kind of tying into the last question. You don't want it to be so confusing that nobody even knows what it is or what it's for. And what I like to say is, Semaphore comes with a unlimited read-only license. So while you may just have a handful of people, and it usually is just a handful of people managing the core Semaphore operation, you can make the taxonomies visible to the entire organization so that they can at least see it. And like in the case of Boeing, they can see it and they can download it. If they have a particular vocabulary they're interested in, they can go browse it, find the right one, and just grab it and use it. So implement something like that, so that the vocabularies that drive Semaphore are visible, and we have visualization kind of toolkits that you could just plug onto a web page on your intranet and say, here are the vocabularies, and they can browse it and search for terms. And that's had a lot of value in different corporations, because it instantly makes these things visible. And then they could say, oh, now I know how I might be able to use that in my system. And then they can talk to you about how to use the APIs and just all the capabilities that Semaphore is capable of in terms of integrations.
Yeah, and I would add to that a little actually. So the additional value of Semaphore that recently we are seeing many customers are leveraging is in their agentic AI or RAG solutions actually. So a couple of things we already mentioned in the slide, like prompt sanitizing or response sanitizing before the prompt is sent out to the to the LLM, okay, sanitize and ensure that actually it contains only required things. There is no unnecessary or unwanted queries that we do not want the customer to ask actually, because it might be extracting PIA information or something like that actually. Same thing with the response sanitization as well, to ensure that the question and the responses are really aligned from a uh, at the minimum actually at the sentiments perspective actually, right? So in the example that I mentioned during the presentation was the question was about a complaint, right? So the answer should be in the tone of a resolution, right? So whether it is matching that, so those kind of things actually, Semaphore, a trip through Semaphore classification aboutness, finding aboutness will be a good idea to do that actually, and many customers are doing it. Apart from that, actually, the vocabulary management, the handling the synonyms, which are very, very local to the departments or to the organizations, right? So that is that is a knowledge graph. That is where actually knowledge graph really helps, right? So your knowledge graph has your company specific, enterprise specific information, which no LLMs are trained with, right? Your department one user might not be even knowing that actually department two uses this particular term, right? So when those kind of situations happens, this knowledge graph being introspected before the prompt is generated for your LLM solutions would be really helpful in understanding the context of the question better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Biju and Jim, for the answer. We have one other question here. Do you typically see greater value/success derived from the use of Semaphore with clients who have integrated it with and classifying content and data across more than one system /repository? We are currently just using it with SharePoint Online, but utilize other systems to store content and data, and those aren't benefiting from the application of consistent metadata yet. Would more integrations with key systems be advisable, and how easily can it be extended?
Yeah, great question. I can start with that. I think it's kind of maybe self-evident. Yeah, the more applications you can apply Semaphore to, the more value it's going to provide to your organization. But there's some key points to that. One is that's the idea is that you want to assign, at least for a particular business area or area of business, project or whatever, to use the same metadata to tag your content, regardless of where it appears. That enables aggregation of information across repositories. I know at one of our, just as an example, another SharePoint Online customer that uses Semaphore for tagging content there, they also use it to tag an enterprise search system that is indexing internal documents from an internal, I believe it's a lab notebook system. So there's a lot of internal research documents that are only available inside the company, and Semaphore is indexing that content. And it's also accessing the content that's been tagged in SharePoint Online. SharePoint Online benefits on its own from all the metadata, but that same content is also aggregated into this search system. So it's using the same metadata. So across these different repositories, and the search engine itself is probably crawling multiple sources. Across all of that information, you're using the consistent metadata. So if you're bringing up in a classic search paradigm, you're bringing up a list of results, you can filter on metadata properties that are controlled across the different systems, and that's the goal, right? Is to aggregate, be able to find information wherever it is in your organization and bring it together in a way that helps address your issues. And all this fits right into the Gen AI RAG space as well. You want your RAG solution to have access to the right information wherever it may be stored. And if you want to add even more value to that, I would say have something like MarkLogic, that is very good at bringing content from different places, even if it's more of a kind of a metadata hub. Maybe the system of record is out in the business, but if you want to rapidly get the information that you need to send to the AI, or in one case, or just any type of information retrieval situation, having that information in one place with the pointers back to the system of record, but some place where you can get that information very rapidly and aggregate it to deliver to the AI or some other agent, human or robotic agent. Wouldn't you say that's true, Biju, in terms of MarkLogic's value? It can be used as a
Yes,
core
so
database for a particular use case, but it can also be used as kind of an aggregator.
yeah. MarkLogic is in the business of data aggregation for the longest time, actually giving enterprise search capability on top of that. And as Jim was mentioning, you need not necessarily bring the data and store it in MarkLogic. Actually, you can extract the metadata and retain the links to the original content and leave it, right? So leave the original content to keep it in the original system of record. So in that way, actually, we have been integrating. I have customers who are actually Documentum, SharePoint, and file systems, right? So these three are aggregated in the metadata, giving a search interface which covers all this actually, but we are not storing the entire content. We have only links to the original content, but we have the key search terms, the classification tags, things like that. It is stored in MarkLogic. So the search will hit those terms that actually, and then the links will be provided to the original sources, right? So definitely, to answer the question of whether having metadata from other systems will benefit, actually, definitely the answer is yes. Multiple SharePoints, being SharePoint Online, probably you will have one SharePoint kind of a view, actually. But before SharePoint Online was becoming popular, there were like hundreds of SharePoint sites that many enterprises had in the past, right? Before SharePoint Online became popular. On top of that, there are like file systems. Me and Jim are actually supporting a customer which have their primary use case was classifying the content in abundant folders, right? In machines, when people leave the company, they leave the laptop, and so what to do with that, right? So when they do the backup, actually, it goes to a drive, and okay, what to do from there, right? Because there is a lot of valuable information that people have stored in their laptops. So and then we added SharePoint on top of it, and now multiple other systems are being considered for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. The file share question, because file shares can't store metadata. So if Semaphore is adding metadata, as part of some crawling action, it needs to put the metadata somewhere, and there's no better place for that stuff than MarkLogic. The other thing I wanted to add to this, your knowledge models, your taxonomies, or whatever that are in Semaphore may be tailored to a particular use case, or to the SharePoint repositories that you're classifying. Whether or not you can pick up those knowledge models and apply them to another use case is something you would have to think through. It may be that's where you might get into some type of federated model where you've got the model focused on your SharePoint clients, and then you've got another model that's a little different because it's looking at Viva or Documentum or some other system or file share that requires a different strategy. So the flexibility of Semaphore to use different models that maybe have very common framework but might have distinct needs depending on the use case is one of the great advantages of Semaphore. It's you can do a lot out of the box, but it's also extremely flexible in terms of how you tailor it to meet different business needs. Yeah.
Thanks, Biju and Tori, for Jim, for answering that. That wraps up our Q&A portion for the webinar today. Thank you again, Biju and Jim, for joining us today and answering the questions from the audience. And thank you for all who attended today and engaged in the webinar. We hope to see you this fall in DC at the Platform Summit. And we hope to see you at the next Semaphore webinar too. And I've dropped links in the chat as well for access to our What's New page and our reviews. And we hope to see you again this fall. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.